What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another HR Heretics segment. Today, we're going to talk about office romance. So, Kelli, last week at Norfolk Southern, their CEO, Alan Shaw, and their chief legal officer got caught in a relationship and caused a lot of headaches and problems for the company. They ultimately fired both the CEO and the chief legal officer. So today, I want to talk about relationships in the office. Both of us have experienced this working at companies and having to deal with these sorts of policies in the past. And I want to start on the company side first. So Kelli, let's start with like your experience dealing with relationships in the office and what's that look like for you?
Totally. Wait. So what happened with the story, Nolan?
Okay, so basically the CEO got into an intimate relationship with the chief legal officer who was his direct report.
Yes.
And the company found out and they ended up terminating both of them.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I think this happens more often than people might think. You know what I mean? And I've had clients before. I had one client call me, and it was a founder, and they were having a relationship with the chief of staff and very worried about it, very concerned. Should we tell the board or not? And I said, listen, you got to disclose this immediately. I think, again, to your story, when the hiding kind of starts on that and these very high stakes situations, it's hard. However, I know I've been to weddings before where people at work have gotten married and they're so happy and everything's great. And I think that especially when you're, young and working, that's usually how you meet people. So it's you can't avoid it. We should talk about the nuances because in my experience, right, the rule, the policy on paper is, to your story with the CEO and the CLO, if you are in a position of power and decision-making authority and influence with another person, then that is not okay. But if you are not, if you are peers, if you are working as individual contributors in different functions, right, that is okay as far as a policy goes, right?
Okay. So this is what I want. I completely agree with you as it relates to what is improper. Certainly a reporting relationship, whether that be directly with your manager or somebody who is even higher above you, say call it 2 or 3 layers above you.
Mm-hmm.
That's certainly improper. Can you explain to the audience why that's improper?
It's improper basically because that person has decision-making authority over your well-being, your life, your money, your job, your career. It can be perceived as, being in very uncomfortable situations, power struggles, coercion, things that are just not aligned
Conflicts
with
of interest.
Sure.
Yep. So now
for
love
good
happens.
or for bad, right? For
exactly.
advantages or disadvantages, and that's a slippery slope when everything's hunky dory and then it goes way downhill real fast.
So let's talk. Let's pull this thread for a second, which is love happens, right, Kelli? Sometimes we don't get to choose who we fall in love with, and say that does happen inside of a company where you are the chief people officer, and you find out about it. What course of action do you take?
I've seen these situations before. Obviously, we all have, right? And by the way, I love this love happens side of you. It's romantic, Nolan. It's great. I mean, you know,
it's in there, Kelli.
Look, I think you have to stay objective, right? Number one, I go, what's the relationship? What is the reporting relationship? What is the power hierarchy here? What is the influence relationship? So let's just be clear on that first. 2, how is this playing out in the organization? Sometimes no one knows about it. Other times the rumor mill is like wildfire and it's distracting. It's causing all sorts of issues, a big mess. So you have to kind of understand what you're dealing with before you jump in and start talking to these people, because they could tell the truth. They could spin you up. They could lie. I mean, all sorts of messiness can come of this. So I'm always, number one, what is the situation? Who are these people? What is their relationship? And how is this playing out in the organization, in what capacity? And then you have to talk to these people and go from there. But it literally could take 50 different turns. You never know. And sometimes you got to separate people from the organization.
Yeah. I tend to agree. I feel like it starts with the company policy. And, a lot of the companies that you and I work with are startups and they don't have policy on these issues yet. And so the way that they define policy often happens when a situation occurs. And then they start to
Right.
codify policy around that. This one for me is a very hard red line to where you cannot be dating somebody that is in your reporting chain, like period, full stop. And so what I would do in this situation is say like the relationship must end before terminating. And if there wasn't a policy in place, I would go straight to termination. And I think you have to do it for sure for the leader. For the subordinate, I think it's a case by case basis. What's your take on that?
I agree with that. I mean, the subordinate here, it's tough because a lot of these cases, that don't end well and go badly, it's usually, a more senior person with a more junior person, a subordinate or whatnot. And it's really hard situation. And I go back to the human nature of things, right? If this is on paper, why is this happening? I mean, that's a whole nother conundrum we can talk about is when these things happen, and they do happen. They happen a lot, I think, more often than we might think. It's just, to your point, the policies or the actions or the things that escalate, it doesn't really happen until those things blow up, right? And bad things occur. And to your point, it's just everyone's watching this. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
If it comes up, everyone knows, everyone's talking about it, everyone's watching. And so the actions you take, it's very precedent setting.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Your workforce is both your organization's greatest strength and largest single cost. With Planful, it's easy to unlock the secrets of successful workforce planning so you and your HR team can make the right business decisions. Imagine using data-driven insights to develop accurate forecasts, close hiring gaps, and adjust talent acquisition plans collaboratively based on costs today and into the future. Planful lets you collaborate with colleagues in finance to understand the value your employees bring to the table. And the best part, you can get started with Planful in just weeks with minimal help from IT. Plus, with Planful, you get an endless runway. Planful grows with you, no matter how fast or large your team scales. Ready to transform your HR strategy? Join over 1,500 organizations worldwide who trust Planful as their go-to workforce planning software at planful.com/heretics. Real talk, most talent leaders haven't yet cracked how to leverage AI for meaningful impact on their hiring processes and business goals. But the leaders who are effectively using AI to transform their recruiting team's efficiency and quality use Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. That means your people can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Join forward-thinking talent leaders at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Fora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts or get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes.
All right, let me give you a hypothetical. So CEO of a tech company starts dating, one of, call it like an L4 in the organization. What do you do as chief people officer in that situation?
That's going to be complicated. I mean, everyone who's listening is probably like, fire the CEO. That's great. That's probably like where that ends. I'm just being realistic and real that there's a whole web of complications in there with the board and the business and the CEO being critical. If it's a founder, it's even, I'd argue, more sticky and complicated. And again, what is the context? How did this happen? I mean, usually they might deny it, etc. It's just a hard situation. However, the CEO should not be dating an L4. Let's just, right, first principles. That should not happen. And so that's where I end up on it. I'm just telling you, I've been through the ringer on this a couple times. It's sticky and complicated and maybe disheartening, but the real deal is it's harder to do that, with folks than you might think in these situations. On paper, it's black and white and it's like, duh. And then you get into real life and all the pressures and all the pulls and all the loyalties and all the, dependencies. It actually gets pretty sticky.
Well, don't forget who signs your check too. And I actually think that in this case, that is actually one of the hardest things that people don't talk about is when impropriety happens of this nature. It gets to your desk, usually because the rumor mill happened. And then all of a sudden you are put into this impossible situation as the chief people officer to where your boss who signs your checks, who, make sure that you are employed, you are the one who has to go like regulate that situation.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. You have to like talk to each side, understand the facts. And then I think you have to like talk to board members about that.
Yeah.
Because you can't
Nolan,
move forward without.
Of course you have to talk to board members, but there's protections there. I mean, you're not going to get fired as a CPO for doing the right thing. I mean, that's
less about getting fired and it's more about the relationship between you and your boss. And this is one of those like hallowed grounds that we haven't really covered on, in the show is when, your boss is the one that's doing something that's nefarious and it's impendent upon you to ensure that the company is abiding by company policy. And, how you handle that. I don't think there is one right answer. I think it's circumstance depends.
Sure.
And you have to go case by case on these things.
Right. And usually I haven't come across many cases where, right, the CPO, the chief people officer, doesn't have help, right, or momentum to help them have that conversation. Because if the CEO's dating an L4, I'd bet more money than not, that it's being talked about and rumors are flying, or it's having some effect on the organization that chief people officer can point to, not just, hey, I know about this. I'm the only one that knows about this. Now it's all on me. That is very rare. I've never come across that. So then that conversation becomes less about the CPO and the CEO relationship and more about the company and the organization and having to do the right thing because more people know about this than just that CPO, if that makes sense.
That's really well said. I think so. Let's put a pin in that one. I think so we've talked about the issues of impropriety as it relates to the reporting relationship and having any sort of like direct line into a leader. What do you think about like a leader in a different org dating a younger employee in an org that doesn't report up to them?
Yeah, I still think that for me is a big no, right? Because if we talk about power and influence, right, these leaders, we have cross-functional leadership team meetings. We have cross-functional calibration sessions where we talk about employees' performance and their pay, if they're going to get promoted. I mean, so those leaders still have influence on junior level employees in different functions in the organization.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Okay, agreed. So I think what you and I are saying is in almost no case should there be some sort of level difference between employees that are having relationships, or at least maybe leadership is the delineation for us, is like, if you're a leader, you should not be dating employees at your company, period, full stop. That is a very easy rule for people to follow.
Yeah.
And if you don't, your employment is at risk.
Right. And if to your point is love. If you need to date them, one of you has to leave. Right? One of you has to leave the company. And we have to be real that these things happen. Look at sports. How many, players date their coaches or end up dating their coaches? I can count to 5 right now in my head, just whether it's personal, not me, but whether it's in my personal life, like college teams, or professional, right? These things, they do happen.
Those that gets really hairy for me. And I just feel like given the power dynamic at play, for me, it's just like it should be a red line for leaders that you should
Yes.
not cross. And
Like,
if you do cross that line, you are the one that is accepting the risk as it relates to your not only your employment, but also your reputation.
yeah. And this is where, like, when they do cross that line and get away with it, so to speak, because of all the things you mentioned, right? Power, this, that. This is where we perpetuate like the inequities and all the things that cause these things to have a bad brand. Politics, seniority, taking advantage. It's not fair, and that
Yeah.
just perpetuates these these conversations about, again, equality and equity, level equality and equity. Like, it should be that should be equal. And I've when folks get away with that, we're not doing the right things around those
Yeah.
topics.
My big thing is I want to ultimately strive for a meritocracy. And how can you have a meritocracy where you have those power imbalances? There's just no way.
For sure.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the more positive frame on this, which is, call it colleagues who are on different teams, right? And, call it at the same level, both individual contributors, they meet at a company function, they start to date, things are going well. Do they have to disclose that relationship to HR, Kelly?
Yeah, that's a great point. That was the other final, like, black and white line in the policy document in the company. If you're going to have a relationship, disclose it. And many people have come to me and disclosed their relationships over the years, and many have worked out brilliantly. I can think of 10 couples in my head right now that met at work. They have families. I've been to some of their weddings over the years. Like, that's wonderful. So I've seen that, and one of the biggest myths is, let's not disclose it because they're not going to support it. We're going to get in trouble. That's just not true.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you think that their concern is we're going to get in trouble for being in a relationship. And so it's just better for us not to tell anybody about it and keep it hidden in secret.
Yeah. I think that's less now, but if I look back 8-10 years, it was more rare for people to come forward than it is now,
Yeah.
So
I agree with you.
there's a lot of great stories. The other sticky one is when those peers, it goes bad and it causes so much distraction, dysfunction in the organization. That's where the hard spot is for people leaders, is being objective and saying, look, this relationship's dead and gone, but y'all are bringing it in. It's affecting execution. It's affecting the team. It's, that noise can be very distracting. And sometimes that has to result in someone leaving or being transferred. I've seen that before as well.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you. When a relationship ends, you must continue to remain professional to the other person. And it almost needs to be like it didn't happen. Because if you are bringing those distractions into the workplace, your employment becomes at risk because you're now risking how people get work done.
Yeah, it becomes a performance issue, right? Whether it's behavior or execution or any mix of the two, for sure.
Yeah. The other one that we didn't talk about is when people make advances on colleagues, like asking somebody out and the colleague declines. I think there needs to be a hard line that you cannot ask more than once.
Totally.
Like, that's when it starts to
This is
get
where, like, the mandatory
really
harassment video trainings come in. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
One advance, no, and then other odd advances, which I've seen or heard of, especially when there's functions and people get a few drinks in them and say or do some really odd things. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Read the room. Read the room.
Read the room, though, is actually kind of like tough. This is one of those areas where I've evolved on. I used to joke with my legal counterpart that our policy document should just be one sentence, which is be adults.
Yeah.
The problem is that there's so much nuance and gray area in especially like this sort of a problem. And so I actually think as an HR leader, I would recommend you codify exactly like what is okay, what is not okay, and what is the expectation if you end up in a relationship, because people don't know how to handle these things. And
Correct.
Be an adult, even though like I really wish the world could be that way, is so aspirational beyond like what is possible for an employee. They need a playbook for how to like go about handling these situations.
Yes, you're right. I mean, I'm the same way. I'm like, right, use judgment, be an adult. And I was shocked at I told you when we started this founder, not wanting to disclose the relationship with the chief of staff, and I couldn't believe it. So you're correct. It's definitely out there, and it's not going away. Humans are humans, so codify it and hope for the best, because there are good stories out there.
Yeah, I mean, I personally know a couple that is married that works with my wife, and they're like the best people. We've hung out with them a bunch of times. They've been together for like 10 years, working in the same company for 10 years. It's like a huge success story. The other thing I just quickly want to hit on is, in a world that is becoming so much more digital, and it is so much harder to like actually interact and meet people, and then, call it like doing due diligence on those people. Right. Because like,
Right.
if you meet somebody on a dating app, like you don't know shit about them, versus if you're working with them every day. I mean, it makes sense that those are the people that we gravitate towards. And so my guidance to HR leaders is to codify these policies, even though it's a pain in the ass, because it's going to come up. It's just 100% going to happen. It's the rule of numbers. The more people you have in your company, the more likely this is going to happen.
And if you codify it just around the things that do come up, you're missing many other things.
Yeah. So leave the room to be able to adapt and grow the policy as you deal with shit that we haven't covered in this conversation. Cool. Let us know what you guys think.
Thanks all.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.